Look at his eyes. While everyone else is busy watching his vertical, they're missing a disturbing glitch in how his brain actually processes the world around him. It isn't just about the muscle. He remembers everything. Think back to the 2011 finals, where we saw a psychological fracture so uncomfortably deep, it nearly ended his entire career before he even hit his prime. It changed him forever. There is a price. Actually, by the time we finish this, you'll see the one hidden truth he's been protecting since his first night in Akron. It's what keeps him running. Think about the weight. What we see here is the allostatic load, which is basically just the brutal wear on the human brain caused by years of living in survival mode. It never really goes away. He moved 12 times. Imagine being a kid in 3 years trying to survive that kind of chaos, only to realize that hyper-vigilance is exactly what makes you a god on the court. He was always scanning. This wasn't just talent. It was a survival trick for a child who had to predict disaster before it walked through the front door. He had to know everyone's next move. It's called executive functioning. In the world of neurology, LeBron's ability to map an entire environment in milliseconds is basically the biological equivalent of being on steroids. It's high-speed data processing. He was 16. Being labeled the chosen one at that age is a terrifying burden that would have logically crushed almost any other developing kid on the planet. But he didn't break. He built a fortress. Since his father wasn't there, he began constructing this massive wall around his ego to fill that paternal void left behind. He became his own protector. He became the father. The mind works in a funny way here, because he forced himself into this archetype of authority where he had to be the provider for everyone else. He was the boss. Then came the decision. It was a branding nightmare that sent a global wave of pure hatred toward him, forcing his brain to go into a defensive, survivalist crouch. The world turned dark. Everything stopped in 2011. Against Dallas, it wasn't just that LeBron lost. It was that he experienced a total cognitive freeze right in front of our eyes. He couldn't think. We call it choking. But for LeBron, this was a systemic collapse of his internal identity because he finally met a problem he couldn't outthink. His brain just quit. Muscle was a lie. He realized that his physical strength didn't matter if his mind could still be shackled by fear during the moments that actually mattered. He had to rebuild. The dark room followed. He sat in total silence in Miami, facing what we call a psychological death of the person he used to be. He had to kill the old LeBron. He found a weapon. Now, he has this eidetic memory where he can recall the exact spot all 10 players were standing during any random play from 2014. It's a total cheat code. It's a neural map. This isn't just a cool trick. It's what allows him to see the game in a fourth dimension that nobody else on the court can even perceive. He's ahead of time. The money is secondary. While he spends over $1 million a year on his body, the real secret investment is in his neuro-efficiency and keeping his brain sharp. That's the real engine. He uses hyperbaric oxygen. By sitting in those chambers, he's not just healing muscles. He's pumping oxygen into his prefrontal cortex to keep his data processing at peak levels. It's almost mechanical. His IQ is data. Think of his basketball mind as a high-speed processor that calculates geometric probabilities while he's sprinting at 20 miles per hour. It's not intuition, it's math. He became the director. When he shifted into that point-forward role, it was a massive psychological pivot from being the guy who scores to being the guy who controls the room. He owns the floor. He uses cognitive empathy. This is the weird ability to know exactly where his teammates need the ball before they even realize they are open. He knows them better than they do. But it's cold. There is a strategic cruelty to this kind of intelligence because he uses it to systematically dismantle the confidence of his opponents. He breaks their spirit. He reveals the illusion. He doesn't just want to win. He wants to show you that your entire defensive strategy was completely useless from the very first whistle. It's psychological warfare. He uses shortcuts now. As he aged, he moved away from pure physicality and leaned into peak heuristics, which are basically mental cheats to save his energy. He plays smarter, not harder. He's still dominating. At age 39, his brain has become so insanely efficient that it compensates for the fact that his muscles are finally starting to slow down. The mind is winning. Wait, here's the truth. The reason he's been able to do this for 2 decades isn't actually a love for the game. It's something much darker than that. It's an obsession. He fears erasure. Deep down, he's plagued by an insecurity of disappearing, a fear that if he stops winning, the world will just forget he ever existed. He's running from silence. He's still that kid. Despite the 4 rings and all the records, the boy from Akron is still absolutely terrified of becoming invisible again. He has to stay on top. He stopped being nice. The real shift in 2011 was that he finally embraced the villain within his own mind, choosing to be a monster to his own limitations. He stopped seeking approval. He weaponized his trauma. He didn't find peace. He found a way to turn his past into a 20-year obsession with being immortal. It's a tool, not a memory. He isn't chasing Jordan. What we see is a man running away from the haunting ghost of the child who had absolutely nothing. That's the real competition. That is the price. He has a mind that can never stop calculating, simply because if he stops, he might finally remember the pain of losing everything. He can't afford to rest. It's not a triumph. The psychology of the king is actually just a masterclass in the absolute refusal to disappear from history. He's fighting for every second. He is a machine. In that refusal, he became the most terrifyingly efficient psychological force that the world of sports has ever had to witness.